Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. I'm sure we have many time zones here present. My name is Cynthia Lawson Jaramillo, and I'm honored to welcome you to this event in celebration of Professor Raz Godelnik's new book, Rethinking Corporate Sustainability in the Era of Climate Crisis, a Strategic Design Approach. I am the Dean of the School of Design Strategies, in which Professor Godelnik is Assistant Professor of Strategic Design and Management. The School of Design Strategies is one of Parsons' 5 schools, and it is the one in which we center systems, methods, and design research in the study and practice of art, design, and business. We test new ways of improving urban environments, business models, and social systems. Across our degree and non-degree programs and faculty research activities, we investigate innovative, equity-centered design research to meet needs ranging from elder care to supply chain alternatives, becoming a catalyst for change in cities, services, and network systems. We are convinced that the world's most complex problems can only be addressed through multidisciplinarity, rigor in theory and practice, and collaboration. Professor Godelnik's commitment to climate crisis is an exemplar in how our faculty engage with issues through practice and research, and his book invites us to rethink the corporation specifically, and business generally feels more important than ever. I want to thank my colleagues Mark Randall and Alexander Fairweather for making today's event possible, and I'm grateful to the presence of Asheen Phansey, Jen Van der Meer, Maxine Bédat, and Sesh Vedachalam for today's conversation. Now I will turn it over to Jen, Assistant Professor of Strategic Design and Management at Parsons and the founder and CEO of Reason Street.
Hey everybody, welcome. I'm so excited to see so many students, people we know out in the sustainability world, and alums show up to this event. Welcome everybody. We're gonna have a wonderful panel. The last 15 minutes, we will take questions from you all. So please put your questions in the chat. We'll be moderating behind the scenes and selecting from that chat to answer your questions. I'm going to start by giving you a short introduction to every one of our panelists. First, we have Sesh Vedachalam. Sesh is an associate director at Frog Design Strategy. From one ex-Frog to another, Frog is a global design consultancy, and Sesh works at the intersection of sustainability, DEI, and innovation to build a more generative and equitable world. Next, we have Maxine Bédat. She is the director of the New Standard Institute and author of Unraveled, The Life and Death of a Garment, a book we're reading here at Parsons, which has been shortlisted for the Financial Times McKinsey Business Book of the Year. And we have Asheen Phansey. Asheen is the co-founder and CEO of 11 Radius, and a member network which works towards circular fashion. He's also the adjunct professor at MCAD of biomimetic design, and he's an expert in corporate sustainability. And as Cynthia introduced, we have Raz Godelnik, my colleague here at Parsons School of Design, assistant professor, strategic design and management. The reason why we're here today, rethinking corporate sustainability in an age of climate crisis. So that, and this is a strategic design approach, which is the whole reason why we've convened this incredible group of people. This is a lot of strategy and a lot of design. And so I'm going to start with the first question. Can we rely on companies to save us from climate breakdown? Give everyone a moment, big question, and I'm going to start at the top with Sesh.
No pressure. Well, thanks, Jen. Can we rely on companies to save us? Well, I think about it slightly differently in this fight to reverse climate change, to build a more regenerative, equitable world. It's going to take every single one of us, right? All of us have a part to play in it. And by that, I don't mean what we do in our individual lives, how we change our behaviors, etc., which you can and choose to change, but really the power comes from how we act as part of the systems that we belong to. So how we leverage our power within those systems and how we use that to move the system in a different direction. So companies have an immense amount of systemic power, which also comes with that amount of responsibility, right? So it's really, and companies aren't like, they are an abstract concept, they're made up of all of us inside trying to make that change happen. So yeah, I think it is going to be a pluralist approach. We can't rely on the abstract companies to do it, but we have to make it happen within them.
All right, I'm going to go with our expert in corporate sustainability, Asheen. Where do companies fall in the plan to save us from climate breakdown?
Thanks, Jen. You'd think, given 15 years in corporate sustainability, I'd say resounding yes, corporations will save us. Just to relate a quick anecdote, just among us friends, you know, I was running sustainability for a $4 billion tech firm, and we'd slowly been climbing the ranks of the Corporate Knights Global 100 Most Sustainable Corporations Index. If you're familiar with that, it's announced at Davos every year. And in my last year there, which was 2018, we got #1 on the list. And I remember having this dual moment of pride in the work that my team and I had done, but also of just sort of this realization that, man, if we're #1 and I kind of know all of the potential that we're leaving on the table, what is the rest of the world doing? And so, you know, I think to the literal answer to your question, can corporations save us? Yes, they can. I just don't think that the pace is enough. I mean, I feel like corporations are generally presenting these trends of being, 5% better year on year as the world is burning and needing us to be 100% better in a decade. And so I think the majority are looking to evolution when they should be looking at revolution in some of their core systems and core processes. Now, I do think that there are a number of really cool companies that are leading in putting really ambitious targets and goals on the agenda and saying, we don't know how we're going to get there, but we're going to totally change the way we do business. And it really is that fundamental. It's about looking at new business models that don't rely on consumption and material conversion and fossil energy. And so if we can radically move forward with new business models and new ways of doing business, yes, but track record is not great.
Right, I'm going to ask Maxine, especially on that follow-up of the role of the corporation.
To build on the really great answers so far, it's hard to follow up with that. I think I'll just pick up on a few things. I'll wear the legal hat and say it's a necessary but not sufficient. I think what we're going to see hopefully are some corporations taking a leadership role, and hopefully others will follow. But I do think, and this is foreshadowing, part of the discussion that I believe we'll have, is that legislation will be needed, because we're not going to have all companies take on the leadership position that they should, from a moral standpoint, take on. And then I would just kind of follow up on the ambitious targets, because we see ambitious target setting, and I do think generally that is a great internal means to build momentum inside a company. But from what actually happens at the end, we're not seeing companies achieving these ambitious targets or anywhere near where they should be in terms of pace to even achieve their own targets that they have set for themselves. We see this in the fashion space, where companies get very excited to talk about and this is like the leading company talking about their per product decrease in greenhouse gas emissions, but then asked about their net increase, they're less excited to share that news. So I do think that, we're going to need to set legislation, and this isn't just a requirement. It's not against business. It's actually to allow business to do the right thing, because at the moment, even though we talk about those double bottom lines and, it all sounds like a win-win, making things green costs money. Doing, improving labor costs money. And in this way, through legislation, we can really address those issues and not make a company uncompetitive by doing the right thing.
Great. I'm going to kind of couple it with our next question and really put this to Raz. So that same question about companies and their role in saving us from climate breakdown, but also with the core concept of your book. And we recommend everyone get this book, read this book, because it's such a great, it just brings together so many wonderful aspects of the sustainability lens that really hadn't been brought together before. But this concept that you have of sustainability as usual. We've heard from Asheen about the evolution, not the revolution, and from Maxine about the goals and regulation, and Sesh about everybody's role in this. But what is sustainability as usual? What's wrong with, like, what is it when we see it, and what's wrong with that approach?
Thanks, Jen, and thank you, everyone. So I thought, how would I best demonstrate what is sustainability as usual? And what I came up is this example that I shared with students, and I really love. And this is this news that came from Kraft Heinz about their amazing success to make their ketchup bottle cap recyclable. And what was interesting was that they mentioned that they invested 8 years of research and development and involving more than 185,000 hours, investing $1.2 million to find the best replacement for the current ketchup bottle cap, right? And this is what we're talking about. So I was amazed, like, this is, they were proud in this achievement, like, this is, that they, I don't know, this was a new way to get to the moon or Mars, but it was just a ketchup bottle cap, right? And in a way, right, this is not from, 2001 or 1991, this is from July 2021, right? And in a sense, yes, it's going to save, potentially, right? It's going to save 1 billion caps from polluting the soil and landfills and water resources. But I think it misses a fundamental question really about, shouldn't we, ask better questions about why do we need single-use ketchup bottles at all? Isn't it time to think, just as Asheen mentioned, right, about new business models, right, that are far more sustainable and are far more aligned with, with ecological boundaries and so in a way, for me, this is the perfect example, right? So sustainability has become a norm, right? Every company is involved in it, but it's still very much grounded in what I describe as shareholder capitalism, right? The idea that it's first and foremost about profit maximization, and therefore the efforts are subjected, right, to profit maximization. And eventually what do we get? We get a new cap for a ketchup bottle, right? We get very incremental progress, and that's not the type of progress that we need in order to really to address the multiple crises that we face. First and foremost, the climate crisis.
Great. I'm gonna do a follow-up, I think, with Sesh. We'll start with you on this sustainability as usual concept. Like, is that a concept that resonates? How do you know it when you see it? And what do you do in your practice when you get a brief that feels like it's sustainability as usual? How do you help reframe it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when we get sustainability as usual mindset, it shows up all over the place, right? And I'll explain it in two different ways. One is, companies normally have purpose, planet, and profit really like pulling them in very different directions. The good companies today might have their purpose and sort of profit aligned, but even then that doesn't really take into account what you need to be doing for planet, and when I say planet, I also mean sort of social systems and so on. So getting that right and aligning that to everything else you're doing is really important, but not many people do it, right? And the other thing is, let's take it to an example of like literally what I would do with a client. So everybody's aligned that we need to do this work. We're going to do some sustainability innovation. And let's say we get in a room and we try to set a vision or a strategy for that. And the problem is that everybody's coming into it with old mindsets and mental models that are invisible, right? And it's like literally everyone's bringing a different elephant into the room. And we spend the entire time ignoring these elephants and how they're getting in the way. And we try and push through with processes and methodologies and brainstorming and all of that. And we get mediocre results. So it's not surprising. But actually design can do this quite powerfully. We can externalize and visualize and acknowledge that this exists, right? These elephants exist. And I really like Bill Sharp, who uses a 3 horizons framework. And he talks about how each horizon of innovation has a different voice or a kind of role that you inhabit. So in the first horizon of sort of business as usual, and today, there are people who just have to keep the lights on. They have to keep things moving. They have practical responsibilities to employees, to customers, and so on. And it's not that we want to dismiss this as people who are innovating. And then there are people who are looking further ahead to the second horizon of innovation. These are entrepreneurs, they want to get something done, they're action oriented. And then there are the visionaries who are saying, no, let's not stop running, let's get the radical vision right. Because we need to be moving in the right direction more than just moving for the sake of moving. And when doing the workshop, I invite people to step into roles that they normally don't do. And that's kind of powerful to say, okay, we're not dismissing your concerns as somebody who has to manage things today, but for an hour, step out of that and take a different role. And we can come back and address the concerns that we do have. And I think this is how we make the sort of invisible visible and acknowledge people's real sort of emotions and fears is how we can start to get anything done. And then there's the hard work of actually doing it.
Awesome answer. Thanks. Maxine, I'm going to ask your work at the New Standard Institute. How do you address, do you resonate with the sustainability as usual concept? The case you mentioned of measuring each product, but not in aggregate, is that an example?
Yeah, I mean, especially being focused in on the fashion industry, we see it a lot. I mean, that's just mostly what we experience. And I think to me, it feels like there has been movement, at least in the direction, in a good direction, where I think we are at this peak greenwashing, green wishing, whatever you want to attribute it, where I think we've moved from a space, and I think the fashion industry is such a good case study because it is so consumer focused or citizen focused, if you want to use different words. But we went from this space where I think fashion, when I first started in this space 10 years ago, nobody discussed sustainability, was not on the agenda. People why fashion? There was just a big question mark. I think now with a generation that deeply cares about the climate crisis, the fashion industry has turned around and been like, oh my God, marketing opportunity. We need to have something for this generation. Let's put this, sustainability collection together. And I've literally seen decks where it's what are the trends this season? Leopard stripes sustainability. That is your business as usual in a screen grab right there. And that is a real deck that landed on my lap. But now we're at this place, and the work that we do at NSI, a lot of it is engaging with media to educate media using data about, how can they look at press releases with a more critical eye? What is the role that media actually plays in all of this? And I think as a result of that, we're seeing much more media coverage. There still needs to be more, still in more prominent placement. But now there's a more significant pushback where I think brands are seeing we can't just get away with this business as usual. It's still there. I'm not saying it's a glorious road ahead. But I think we're kind of at this pivotal moment that I'm hoping we're going to see more serious commitments and at least less of this greenwashing, green wishing, which we are peak of at the moment.
Okay. So I'll take it over to Asheen and ask another question, and others, also jump in is like, what are the key obstacles we do need to overcome to get us past this threshold of just kind of living within this business as usual ROI framework? And if you're in, if you're in a boardroom, if your practice takes you there, like, what do you say when somebody in the room does that business as usual, shareholder-centric elephant in the room, everything needs to be put through that lens before we say yes or no? Like, in those moments, what are the magical words you can say or do to unlock the mindset shift?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the work is done before you enter that boardroom. And that work is, what do the people that I'm talking to care about? So, I remember talking to a head of investor relations, and he was like, hey, I totally get, this was for a consumer products company, a fashion brand retailer. And he said, I totally get sustainability. I believe in it, but my CEO won't really let us invest in it. What can I tell to my CEO that is going to make him care? And then so, I asked the question, well, what does your CEO care about? Oh, well, just the bottom line, what about growth and expansion? Yeah, definitely. Well, all right. So what we're seeing now from ESG ratings firms is that if you don't publish a social or environmental report, many times they're going to look at you, they're going to rate you low on that score, and they're going to say, this company has unaddressed social and environmental risk on their balance sheet and their income statement. And so you're going to be afforded a higher cost of borrowing. So when you go to expand, you're going to end up paying more for that capital. And he's like, aha, this is something my CEO really cares about. Another example, when I was a head of sustainability, I was working a lot with our facilities department. And at first it was a tense relationship, because I was saying, hey, we should do more, greener practices. And they were saying, look, you're making our jobs harder. Why are you giving us all these extra considerations? And as we really started talking through, and I mean, literally, like, stepped off, let's have a coffee, tell me about your kids, and then get into, how's work going? One thing I realized was we had co-located into a new building, nice LEED Platinum building. And because, if you've ever worked in an office, you know how this works, people's commutes changed and they got angry. And so they took it out on the building. Oh, this terrible building we have to come to. And facilities was really distraught about that. They thought, we've worked really hard to make this a nice building. We want people to have pride in it. And so what we did as the sustainability team and the facilities team is we cut these beautiful glass plaques of the green features of the building, the features that had led us to have the LEED Platinum rating. And we created a tour around the building. We created a campus ambassador program and trained 50 employees or so to give this tour. And after 2 years of this, we ended up giving 75 to 100 tours a year to employees, to customers, to outside groups, to alumni associations. And so what happened was, at the coffee station, someone complains about the building. Someone else that didn't even know who I was said, actually, did you know that it does this, and it has this feature, and we capture rainwater and all this other stuff. And so again, it was sort of aligning the interests of what facilities wanted and what sustainability what impacted the sustainability of the building. And so it's realigning people's interests together to say, hey, sustainability kind of covers everything. What piece of this can I dust off and make part of what you do and where you're trying to go?
It's like a relational approach to overcoming the obstacles. Maybe I'll take it back to Raz, that story Asheen told of getting the CEO to kind of care about the way the ratings are going to reflect on the legacy of that CEO. Is that in your dream, in your vision of how do we actually break through this kind of mindset block? What do you foresee? What would you say if you're in the room with that same CEO?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, I have a bit of a different approach. I think that, this approach of let's get people on board, let's get the C-suite on board. It has value. It can make change happen, but I think that it's just, it won't help to create a systemic change. I think when we talk about obstacles, for me, the first obstacle is really what I call, what I consider failure of the imagination, right? If I ask everyone here really about trying to imagine, right, what a healthy business sector with, healthy relationships with society looks like, right? It's very difficult for us to imagine because we're so much grounded in the constraints of the status quo, right? It's very difficult to consider, right, what could be a new story for business. But this is exactly what we need to create, right? A new story that is basically constructing, right, a new vision for business. And this is hard. This is hard for me. This is hard for, I think, for everyone really to think what this story would be about. But one thing that I would say is that yeah, we can convince, CEO by CEO, but at the same time, I think that it's also about how do we make it, more costly for them to sustain the status quo? Jeff Bezos didn't change his mind about the climate policies at Amazon because he had an aha moment, right? He made this change because there was so much pressure from outside and from the inside of the organization that it became very clear that it's going to be much more costly to the brand not to significantly, right, change the policy. That wasn't really a aha moment about the business case for sustainability. This was, right, a pure, right, cost benefit analysis, right, in a way where the cost was too costly. And I think that, in a sense, may be a way to think about, again, how do we push towards a systemic change? And eventually it's also really about policy change, right? Do we want really to change company by company, or, right, given the urgency, do we need to think about, right, broad policy changes that could hopefully have greater impact?
All right, let's get to this concept of where do we see change. So we have on this Zoom today a lot of students, alums, and if I'm guessing right, a lot of folks who are trying to transition into a sustainability career. So if you had advice of, so it's less of like, where do you see the change happening over the next 3 to 4 years, but where should any one human go? Like, where in the system, which levers, if we're thinking about levers in Donella Meadows, levers of change, where should we direct people over the next 3 to 4 years? Like, here's where we need you in the realm of sustainability. Is it companies? Should they go into finance? Should they get into changing markets, regulation? Like, where would you send them? And I'll start with Maxine.
Sure. So I will echo what Sesh started out this session with, which is, that a company is a fiction. It's made up of people, and the same thing that a consumer is a fiction. It's a person. And so I think that the change, we need people everywhere. We need people in the companies. We need people asking questions in conventional companies saying, why aren't we doing something different, and leading the charge to turn those ships around. We need people engaging with citizens and helping them understand and helping them engage the companies that they purchase from and their legislators. We need legislation and creative legislation on this. We need educators, we need media, we need all of it. We need social media stars, who can tell the story and translate it. So there isn't a place that we don't need this, these people. I think in terms of levers, we need legislation. And I think, working towards that goal, whether you're in a company, a citizen, media, education, any one of those, any part of this can also help facilitate legislation and help champion that.
Can you be more specific, especially in relationship to your work, like legislation, where would you go congregate? Who would you lobby?
Yeah, sure. I love that question because we're working on policy at the moment. So I think in terms of legislation, I would put a really political hat on and say well, where is it possible? Where do we see possibility? Because, people will start with well, we need international agreement and everybody has to be on board. Okay, that's not happening. So great, let's get everybody in the world convinced. At the same time, where on this playing field can we actually have legislation? And on that, I think the EU is, leaps and bounds ahead of us, but we are making great, even federal progress. On the apparel side of things, the policy that we're working on is state level, as individual states that have kind of democratic supermajorities. There's real opportunity to make progress with, states like California and now New York really trying to show that they have the market size to dictate worldwide standards. And so that's kind of where I would put my energy and where we are putting our energy at the New Standard Institute.
Great. All right, I like this question. I'm going to use it in future cocktail parties. Hello, what's your lever of change and how are you saving us from climate breakdown? Sesh, may I ask you that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I agree with Maxine. I was thinking the same thing. We need all of it everywhere. And the way that, the thing is for us and our clients, most of them understand this is a work that cannot wait for multiple reasons, right? Many of them aren't necessarily citing legislation or fear of legislation as a reason to do the change. Consumers just are already asking for it. The attitudes have shifted. If you're not doing this work, you're just not going to have a competitive advantage. And you're not going to be prepared for any disruptions or shocks that are coming your way in multiple different ways. So we've agreed on the fact that we need to do it. And the problem is the getting stuck in how do you get going? And how does that work just become evolution and not revolution, as Asheen said. And that's where we take a sort of 360 approach, take a full stack approach in thinking about how to do this shift to a regenerative future. So, and the challenge always in doing this work with clients is, you have to get practical at some point, make the business case at some point. But as the people who are doing the work, us and the client team and the people who are hands-on with it, is holding that mental flexibility to be going to really, really inspirational places, building a really radical vision, building that collectively, inclusively, like in Asheen's example, making sure the facilities team were inputting into your strategy in the way that you were thinking about it and so on. And bringing that sort of approach. So for example, we talk about 4 areas of sustainability. So one is you always start the strategy with making sure the brand purpose is in place and the brand values are in place. We did recent work with a sustainability materials company where they literally set their purpose as we're in business to reverse climate change. And our values are putting people and planet first, and transparency and stewardship. That's really powerful. And that then filters down into everything the company is then doing, your products, your services, your decision-making, who you choose to hire, how you engage with policy and legislation. And that's most of what we do is that work, is helping companies make sort of product design decisions, doing research to understand what do you need to be building, how do sustainability considerations affect that, how do you build capabilities within your organization, the org design piece, building an internal culture, and then it's about go-to-market strategies and new business models. And here, I think we all need to be extending our skill set. So I wasn't trained in thinking about, I'm trained in thinking about business models, but not so much policy and how that could interact with things, or how do you build a ecosystem and a coalition with other nonprofits and so on. So really the remit of what we're all trying to look and do, how we're framing the responsibility of a company and all of the different layers that we need to change within the company to be doing this is how we think about change. And you need to be doing it, all of it at all the time, which sounds difficult, but that's the work, right? That's what we're breaking down and doing.
Can I follow up on the regenerative? Because I want to bounce over to Asheen and have him talk about circularity, specifically, especially for folks that are new and curious about sustainability. You're at Frog Design, global design consultancy. What does it mean to be doing regenerative work with a big corporate brand, even if that brand is saying that their purpose is sustainability? What do you mean by regenerative when you talk about product design? Really tangibly, what does that mean?
Definitely. Being regenerative is basically, so it's very simply put, so sustainability, and especially when people are trying to react to, oh, there are net zero targets in the state and we need to do that, you tend to get into a compliance sort of mindset. And I'm saying that with sort of sustainability initiatives and also diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. which are equally a part of this. But regenerative framing helps shift that from not just, sort of stopping doing harm or just not doing bad, to actually, how are we actually benefiting everything that we're touching, whether that's natural resource systems, supply chains, people who are working in those supply chains, our customers and all of that, and looking at just how we're creating more value in each place, which, it's pretty natural remit for a company to be thinking about. So that's very simply what I would call regenerative. And for us, it helps push clients into a different space of not just being defensive and not just playing catch up with the market. And this actually unlocks really different types of innovation in the work that we do.
So yeah, bouncing over to Asheen, just do you use that word regenerative, circularity? It seems to be the thing you're working on in your member network. How do you frame this challenge ahead of us in terms of choosing the right levers to pull and push over the next 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot about sustainability as doing less bad, which is a good place to start. But where we need to go to is doing more good. And I think it's reflected in kind of the standard definition of sustainable development that we've been using over the last couple of decades from the Brundtland Institute of essentially, I'm going to paraphrase glibly, I'm going to say it's not screwing up so bad that we rob future generations of the ability to then screw up their own resources. It's clearly a non-negative definition, right? And so if you look at, there's a lot of others, for example, the Biomimicry Institute is fond of saying life creates conditions conducive to life. And so we can really start thinking about those positive and regenerative definitions. And I think circular economy is one such area that really goes beyond the work of less bad, which is sort of where sustainability lives. It doesn't have to, but it's kind of typically where it lives today. The way that circularity, I think, goes beyond that is to really start to rethink the fundamental sort of business model of consumption, right? Of we need to sell more stuff to demonstrate success. And I'll give you one quick example. So we're working with a lot of companies that are, with 11 Radius, which is a member organization in the fashion space. We're working with companies that have started to really embrace circular models. So Eileen Fisher and others. And I put out Eileen Fisher because I think it's actually a great example. Their Renew business, which is their sort of resale, used product resale business, has been successful for a long time. But as we've been really digging into how they measure that success, they still measure it in a traditional way, right? So they say, okay, here's mainline revenues minus cost equals profits. Here's the Renew business. Whatever revenue we get from sale of used product minus the cost of standing up this business is our profit. That's our success. But there are other ways of measuring the value of a circular company or venture or entity, right? So for example, you could say, instead of measuring it just how much does it cost for us to bring the product back and then resell it, and that leftover is the margin, you could think about the P&L or margins or profit and loss or margin of a single garment, let's say. So we spend some environmental cost and financial cost to make a jacket, and that cost is cost we bear. We then sell the jacket once for $300. We then add a little bit more cost to bring it back, clean it, patch it up if need be, sell it again for $150. Then we sell it again for $60. And you can stack up the revenues on that one, and you can stack up the major cost we'll be making it the first time, and then a little bit of slices of cost of refreshing it and bringing it back and getting it to its next use. And then you can say, gosh, if we invest the majority of our cost to make it the first time and then sell it 4 times instead of selling it once, isn't that a much higher margin on this particular garment? And so it's a lot about just shifting the way we think about. So sustainability would say, it's great if we resell it once. Circularity would say, let's build our business model around the idea of continuing to put more value out there to more customers, not consumers, because for garments, it's not like you're eating it, there's stuff left. So to create this relationship with customers and sort of get that out there and grow our customer base, grow our revenues, grow our margins by looking at it in a different way.
Thanks. Okay, sorry, Maxine, go for it.
No, just because it would be boring if we agreed all the time. I think that, you know, these regenerative and circular, and just looking on the, you know, some of the data that we're seeing, I think these can be such powerful definitions, but we've also seen them being used for greenwashing as well. And so I think that, you know, sustainability didn't come from the marketing world. It came initially, you know, from the green movement, but then was then co-opted by marketers. And I think we just have to be really careful not to let those terms be co-opted, and that, and not just co-opted by marketers. I think greenwashing is much more powerful of a term than greenwashing, because I don't think companies are there like actively, most of the time, actively trying to deceive. But I do think we have to be very careful and look at the data to make sure that the regenerative, you know, programs that we're putting in place, or the circular programs we're putting in place, are actually measurably reducing net impacts. Because yeah, we're seeing some of the opposite of that, where you know, a fashion company will have an initiative that's circular, but the data isn't actually finding that you know, that method is actually having a significant net reduction, or a net reduction at all. And that I do think then that gets to like, which is something that we haven't touched on yet in this, which is like, what is the company trying to do? And what are we measuring as success? Because if we're continuing, if revenue and margin continue to be the key KPIs, you know, are we actually able to change the business model? Like, does the science allow the business model to change and continue that revenue growth in the way that it has been? So, and I don't think I have a terrific answer for that, but I do think we have to start thinking about it, and not just like assume we can have this green growth.
Okay.
Can I jump in? So let's debate. No, I totally, in this case, I agree with Maxine. I think that, and also one thing that I say in my book, right, that, I mean, again, circularity, right, just like, you know, reporting could be all, you know, great strategies and tools, but the question is, what do we use them for, right? Again, well, what mindset do we bring to the table, right? So far, we did see many companies that for them, applying circular strategies is a way of creating new revenue streams, right? And so the question really is, right, what's the, right, we know where we are, but where do we want to go to? And for me, it's really about, again, challenging the mindset, the mental model that business is grounded in, right? If it's still at the end of the day about profit maximization, then I think, you know, we can't win this fight. We can only win it if we change the hierarchy. If companies will have to put sustainability before profit maximization, if companies will have first and foremost to consider ecological boundaries and societal foundations, then we'll see different designs, we'll see different business models, we'll see different considerations. But that requires really a much bigger shift than, you know, just, you know, thinking in terms of this strategy or that strategy, which is why I think it's so important to think, how do we, at the end of the day, how do we change the mental model in business? Because otherwise, I'm afraid we're going to have a very similar conversation in 10 years from now, and that won't be, you know, that won't be great.
Okay, I'm going to start bringing in some of the questions we've been getting from the audience. They're all around this, you know, it's like this mindset shift. Particularly a question from Nadav, who's in our sustainable business models class. Give us an example of this awakened sustainability. Like what is a company that's shifted from business as usual, sustainability as usual to? And there's another question from Gil Philip Friend about Ray Anderson of Interface, someone I got to work with back in 2005, who's definitely an awakened leader in the way that he shifted his mindset. So I mean, there's one example right there, but who do you look to on this panel? Like, you know, just give me a hand wave. I have a company that is awakened sustainably. Anybody?
Well, I'll give a small example. We work with a company in Germany called the Guest List, which is a high-end cashmere brand, and they've launched something called a service called the Cashmere Spa, and it's an interesting service because what they do is they say, for our customers, as often as you want for free, send us your cashmere items, your sweaters, garments, and whatnot, or jackets, and we'll take it through kind of this like 8-step process where we they actually depill it, like I've seen the facility of a magnifying glass on a razor blade and depill it and do all the disinfectant and everything, and then mend it as needed, and then send it back as often as they want. And the idea is it of course extends the life of the garment. The criticism is doesn't that cannibalize new product sales? And so they said, well, the way that they're trying to look at it from a different perspective is we've figured out how to extend the life of these cashmere garments. And so they're now turning it into a service they provide to other cashmere brands, where they say, we'll do this for our customers for free. We will charge the customers of other brands. And for the other brands, it's a great service to then sort of white label and offer to their own customers. So they're turning that expertise in extending product life into a revenue source to offset any potential of cannibalization of new sales. And once the product is like fully loved and they're like, we can't mend this anymore, can we recycle it? They're actually now creating a collection point for an infrastructure building of getting recycled cashmere to then use garment to garment recycling in their own products. So kind of a neat example.
All right, anybody else? Yeah, Maxine.
So I think that the companies that are doing it right, I don't think any company's figured it out. I don't think there is like, this is how you do it. This is the North Star. And that's what makes this challenging. This isn't just like a straightforward companies are being evil. It's like really how it's a thing that we're all trying to figure out together. But I think the companies that are doing a good job are the ones that are communicating that honestly. That are setting aggressive commitments, not using, empty words that don't have a lot of meaning, but can be honest with their customers and potential customers about what it is that they're doing, what still needs to be done. And just, I think, especially in the apparel space, like there's no such thing as sustainable fashion, right? And like communicating that you buying this thing isn't, you don't get to like feel morally great because you've purchased this thing, you've just purchased another product. And I think that like we do see companies like Veja or Gani even that, have that as their communication strategy. So I can applaud those companies for that type of approach.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say Veja's climate communication speech is awesome. It's so transparent. It's so honest. I totally agree.
Can you tell us the name of the company that you mentioned, Asheen? I got a question about the actual. Tell us again.
Oh, the cashmere company is called the Guest List.
Okay. I'm getting some wonderfully skeptical questions. People that don't kind of believe in this mindset shift is going to be the thing. So I'm going to ask this one from Carolyn Freed. Does anyone in the panel see a scenario where a public company has fiduciary duty to their shareholders to grow infinitely, or high growth VC backed brand could be sustainable? In her view, business model design is innately, I think it says sustainable, but tell me unsustainable. But what do you think about this concept of fiduciary duty and VC backed high growth VC? I'm going to start with well, again, like who feels like they want to take that one
on? I can maybe talk about it. I mean, I think that first, the whole idea that companies need to maximize shareholder value, if you look, and I've read, I'm not a legal scholar, but I read many studies and books of legal scholars, and many of them suggest that this is not aligned with corporate law, and basically this is more social norm than legal obligation. So that's one thing. at the same time, I would say that I would definitely like to see corporate law changing to be very clear about the need of companies and board members to align with a clear purpose around sustainability, and again, clarity about what do we mean when we talk about sustainability. So I hope that answers the question. So I think overall, and we already see, I mean, companies, and I would say one thing, it's more difficult for public company because it operates within the constraints and the pressure of a market. And so many of the relatively good examples that we have are, of private companies and companies that go public. Almost by definition, they're making it much more, much harder for them to align themselves with a more progressive approach towards sustainability.
Yeah, I'd just jump in and say it's companies are really constrained by their success when it comes to promoting sustainability because of that shareholder primacy issue, and you're the idea of sort of infinite growth, I think, really encapsulates what the motivation and the incentive is for especially a public company. I would say one movement that I really like is this idea of benefit corporations. If you're familiar with that, not B Corp, that's a separate but related sort of discussion and certification. But benefit corp is a specific call out in the legal code for establishing a corporation that very simply says, when we make decisions, we're allowed to consider non-financial measures such as social and environmental. And so we can make decisions that aren't in the best interest for our shareholders financially, but are in the best interest for the planet or society. And so when we founded 11 Radius, we founded as a public benefit corporation in Delaware, which uses that same legal code. So I think that's really interesting, and that's something to watch as a really specific challenge to that idea of shareholder primacy.
I'll just add, since I had to go to law school, so the case is Dodge v. Ford, which is the whole problem, the misinterpretation of that case, which happened, I looked it up, in 1919, which people believe is developed this shareholder primacy, but in fact is a total misinterpretation. It just created this business judgment rule that gave businesses broad breadth to decide what was best for the business, but it in no way said that to be a legal fiduciary, you had to do what was best for shareholders. So I think, we have to, we also need, lawyers have a role too, in addition to everyone else. And this fiduciary thing is really just like a very bad miscommunication, but because it's now become like not just a legal thing, that it's become a norm, it is, I think, all the more reason that having a law where this is what a company is required to do, then makes it that to be a fiduciary, you have to do the necessary steps, because you're not going to have sales if you are out of step with the law. So I think that just kind of drives, for at least in my logic, the reason why we need to pursue a legal strategy and a regulatory strategy.
And some nice meta-philosophical questions that may end our conversation today. I'm glad that we're getting into a little bit of debate about this. How can you define success in a growth mindset when it is finite resources, particularly in the apparel industry, where we've had, the slow awakening of sustainability for the last 10 years, and an incredible exponential growth in fast fashion and waste at a higher pace than the awareness, at least in my opinion. So how do we deal with this finite, infinite growth problem, and how we set goals and be in business in the first place? I'll start with Raz, but who wants to take it next?
I mean, one thing is, it's really, I mean, it's again, a bit of failure of the imagination, right? The idea that we can't imagine that a company is is setting up success measurements that are not about growth or some profit goals, but maybe it's contribution to the community, right? Or the way did certain impacts on on society or the environment. But I think in a sense, right, this is where we need to think about how do we change social norms, right? We can say all day, yeah, companies need to, right, to change their, their how they measure success and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's also about what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, right? If the key measurement is growth, right, and it's and we make it unacceptable, then it will be much easier for companies to move into different measurements that are more aligned again with with ensuring that we live in a just and safe operating space. This is very much about not what we demand from companies, but how do we design an environment in which companies can actually make that happen.
I can jump in. I'll take a slightly philosophical approach. So we talk about growth, infinite growth is bad on a finite planet. Conceptually, people get it, right? But I think in general, in sort of climate change circles, we spend a lot of time saying what we're against, what we're fighting against, and that can be energizing in one way, but it does take time away from speaking about what is the world that we want to make? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And who's in it and what's my part in it, and helping people can kind of touch that and imagine that is really important, and having alternative words. So if it's not growth, then people might imagine that, oh, that means I don't have opportunities in the future, so that's scary. So no, infinite growth is bad, but maybe stable and inclusive prosperity is the alternative. You're still going to have prosperity. Actually, you're going to have more than what you probably have right now if you belong to actually most communities in the world. But to say, I think we need to spend more time saying that. And it's nice to have conceptual arguments, but like I think ultimately people need to understand what is it, like it needs to drop into what does it mean for me, or what is this alternative vision like, and then do I choose to buy into it, right? And whether that's me as an individual or a consumer or somebody in a company trying to sort of invest in sustainability or not.
Yeah, in the last couple minutes, Asheen, you had something to say about this one. I'd love you to answer on the fashion question. We have a lot of people that like to see that prism here at Parsons School of Design.
Yeah, well, first I would say I'm learning more and more about fashion, and one way is I'm excited to read Maxine's book as soon as and finish that so that I can then pick up Raz's. There's a cool company called Day Owl, which makes backpacks, and they're making these new backpacks, but they've explicitly said, we're going to put our new backpacks out there until there's enough volume to continue to meet demand by taking back and reselling the backpacks that are already out there. And they've already started doing that resale. And when they have them on their website, they say like, hey, this backpack was like, so-and-so owned it. It's been to these really interesting places. It has a story. And so what they're trying to do is kind of unlink the sale of stuff with like the sale of value, right? And so I think that's at the heart of how we need to reimagine this idea of infinite growth. You can have infinite value that you're pointing out there. You can't have infinite stuff. And so that's what circular economy tries to do. Now that's really theoretical. And it like Maxine is saying, like Sesh is saying, like the work is hard, right? To start to decouple growth and stuff. But it's possible. And I think in this increasingly virtualized world, we're getting more and more technology that enables us to be able to do that. So I'll kind of give that as a ray of hope.
I'm going to round out with Maxine, and I'm going to have a final question for Raz, especially because you work in the fashion space. Like where specifically do you see this growth, infinite growth? Do you buy that we can have infinite value without infinite stuff?
Well, when I kind of dwell on this subject, I think like we're not going to stop wearing clothes. It's not going to be a thing that we do. And the global population is still going up. So like the basics, like there will still be room for plenty of successful companies. And I guess when I start going down this rabbit hole, I think of like, Well, let's get the practical things, like, while we're having this conversation, like even more disposable models are being developed and, going at a rapid, pace, like Pretty Little Things and Boohoo, which is just like even outpacing the Zaras and H&Ms of the world. So I guess like I quickly just try to put on the like practical hat, like, okay, maybe I don't have a perfectly beautiful answer for how we achieve these models, but what can we do to like stop as much of the negative impact that is happening? But I do, I completely agree with Sesh that like we tend to focus also on like we not overemphasize, we lack imagination for what the future should look like, and I do think we need to invest a lot more time in those questions, because I don't feel like we have a concrete answer for what that looks like and what that will mean for jobs and what what that like what exactly I think we have models like the donut economy of what the far future could look like, but I think we need to spend a lot more time, not as individuals, but like on a policy level of really thinking about, okay, well, what would that mean like for how we get there? Because I don't see that happening in the public discourse as much as I would like to see. I don't feel like we have a great concrete narrative of what that would look like.
I'm gonna round it out with Raz. We're a couple minutes over. We'll go one more minute. Raz, I know I've talked to you a lot. I can feel your increasing sense of urgency and the way that you titled the book and the tone that you took. Like it's been increasing every year. And I'm like right there with you, my friend. Like this is crisis. This is no more like clapping for the small effort. So if you look at this whole conversation today, particularly with our participants and what they've added and enriched our conversation with, where do you end with this book, and what do you want to tell this audience about levers, obstacles, shareholder primacy? Where would you focus your next year if you feel the urgency that you feel?
So, I mean, one thing that I would say, I want to say it earlier with regards to people, what they can do. I would say first step, check out the wonderful people here on the panel. I mean, the work of Sesh, Maxine, Asheen, and also Jen. It's really the type of I mean, this is the work of change agents. This is the work of people who are brave, creative, and are not afraid to challenge the status quo. We need more of them in order to start really reimagining, but also realizing that the future that we need to see. And so I want to thank everyone for joining, because I think I learned so much from you and truly appreciate your work. For me, the next step would be to consider how to, while I have, a lot of, a critique tone. I also want to make sure that I build bridges between, the radical thinking and practicality. And for me, the next year, hopefully, the next couple of years will be about building effective bridges, getting to engage with change engines, but also with companies, learning from them, understanding where they're coming from, and trying really to push them to start thinking in new terms. I think that while we talk a lot about changes in social norms and policy, there's a lot of room also for companies to push policymakers and to enable the work of narrative warriors. So I think that there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done, and I hope to to play a part and to do what they can do in order to bring the desired future that I want to see by working with companies, with stakeholders, and hopefully make a little contribution to a better world.
All right, we do end on it. So I want to thank everybody. We had incredible turnout and you all stayed with us. So thanks everyone for participating with us today. Yeah, come learn, debunk myths about shareholder primacy by coming to the New School. Join us at Strategic Design and Management at Parsons. We'd love to have you. And thank you so much to our panelists today, for each one of you, for what you brought. We thank you. And we look forward to future conversations.